I joined the Army as a mechanic, and through that process, I found that you could go to college for free with the military. And specifically, the Army has its own college set aside for really smart individuals, but they also allow about 25% of their student population to come from the military. So soldiers could apply to go to this college. It's called the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I qualified under the soldier program. In Special Forces, in what John Maxwell is talking about in the book Good to Great, is it's more of a collaborative environment where the manager, the bus driver, is more just trying to keep the bus safe, keep it on the road, but he talks to the people in the back. Hey, where do you guys go with your collective talent? What do you think we should be working on? What direction do you think we should go into? And then, this was my experience.
Hey, welcome to this episode of the show. Today's guest is Bryce Hansen, a retired U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret commander and a freelancer who does beautiful art. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What's your story? How did you end up in Green Berets and how life took you from there?
Sure. So not really a good student. I mean, took tests really well, but easily distracted by a lot of different things, whether it was art or sports or just going out and have a good time. And I really didn't have much direction when I was 17, 18 years old. So I joined the Army as a mechanic, and through that process, I found that you could go to college for free with the military.
Today, I want to tell you about a book I'm reading. It's written by 25 veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, all graduates of the Masters of Business for Veterans program at the University of Southern California. The book is called Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation. It collects the personal stories of veterans written in their own words. Pick it up for yourself or a veteran you love. Check out the link in the description for 10% off.
And specifically, the Army has its own college set aside for really smart individuals. I didn't qualify under that category, but they also allow about 25% of their student population to come from the military. So soldiers could apply to go to this college. So it's called the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I qualified under the soldier program. And so I was able to gain admittance in there and graduate with a bachelor's degree. And then I went from being a mechanic to a college student. And then I was an officer now, and I was an artillery officer. I served in Korea for a year, and then I went over to Germany. And during my first tour in Germany, we deployed, I was a platoon leader, and I had 27 people in my platoon, and we went to Iraq for 15 months to do combat operations. And during that time, I was introduced to Special Forces, sharing a base with them and talking with them and conducting a mission with them. You know, I really saw that there was a different approach to the military versus just, do what I say because I'm more senior than you, I have more rank than you, which is called legitimate authority, right? So if anybody has rank or they have a positional power, I'm your boss, you have to do what I say. It's called legitimate authority, and it works, right? But it's not necessarily the best leadership style. It doesn't win people over. It doesn't have a compelling narrative. It doesn't necessarily have their buy-in, right? It's do this or else, punishment, right? So when I was working with the Special Forces guys, I never really knew who the boss was. It was more collaborative. It was more peer-to-peer leadership. And that really drew me. And I said, who sets the rules? Who makes the rules? Who decides what you guys are going to do each night? What missions? And they all looked at me like confused, like, well, we do. I was like, yeah, I know, but like, who's in charge? Like, who tells you what to do? And they're like, nobody tells us what to do. And that really confused me because that's not how the military is run. The military is run by very strict rules and policies. And so it drew me in, and I was really interested in a more collaborative, creative environment that allowed people to express themselves and yet still try to achieve and win, complete a mission. But it became a much more creative process from my perspective. So that really drew me to Special Forces. So I decided to try out. I spent about 2 years training, and then I went back in the United States. I went back to Germany and commanded a team. It's called an A team or ODA. And I had 11 guys working with me. And I say working with me, not for me, because again, Special Forces, the Green Berets, it's a very collaborative environment. And a lot of the leadership that I learned that I thought I knew coming through West Point, which is a leadership school, going through Ranger School, which is marketed as a leadership school, a tactical leadership school, serving in the regular Army as a platoon leader with 27 people in my platoon that I was responsible for, in charge of. I thought I knew leadership. And it wasn't really until I got to Special Forces that I realized there's a unique dynamic. So all the way up until I got into Special Forces, I was operating under a legitimate authority, right? I could tell people what to do because I had more rank than them. There's an interesting dynamic in the Green Berets. It's not really an official policy, but it's often talked about, and I've seen it executed, which is, it's kind of like the old TV show, I guess it's still on now. It's called a Survivor, right? So all the members on the tribe vote out somebody every week until they get down to the last contestant. So while an officer on a Special Forces team does indeed have legitimate authority, right? You're the highest ranking person on that team. All the members, you're responsible for their lives, but they're all equally responsible for each other. And if they feel that the commanding officer, the captain, isn't a good fit for their team, they can go through legitimate channels, like talk to the sergeant major, talk to the commander, and say, hey, we don't really want to go to war with this guy. But there's another often spoken about unofficial policy, which is just they pack up all your gear and they leave it in the hall outside the door, which means all your stuff that you own is not inside this room. So you have no business to go into this room ever again. And so in effect, the team, individuals, they vote. And so they can vote the commander off the team. And I've seen this happen. And it's quite a jarring experience, because you realize, oh, I can't come in here and start bossing people around. I actually have to have a compelling narrative. I have to sell a vision. I have to get buy-in to what we are trying to do. There's a great book, and if people are getting interested in leadership, this is a great entry book. If you're not much of a reader, it's a really easy read. It's written by John Maxwell, called Good to Great. And I think if you're interested in leadership positions or management positions, it's a great place to start. Anyways, in that book, he has an analogy about a bus. And you talk about, if I'm the boss, well, I'm the bus driver. I decide where the bus goes, right? I decide how fast to get there, when to brake, etc. And so, that's management, right? That's one style of leadership. But in Special Forces, and what John Maxwell is talking about in the book Good to Great, is it's more of a collaborative environment where the manager, the bus driver, is more just trying to keep the bus safe, keep it on the road, but he talks to the people in the back. Hey, where do you guys go with your collective talent? What do you think we should be working on? What direction do you think we should go into? And then, and this was my experience, I was the newest guy on the team, even though I was the most senior ranking person on the team, but I had the least amount of experience. So in that case, I'm more of a talent manager and saying, all right, what do you guys want to do? And then how, in my position, how can I help you guys achieve what you've determined as success? Now that leadership style doesn't afford itself to the regular Army, to a lot of corporations. It's more of a flat hierarchy where, we call each other, but we use each other's first names versus saying lieutenant this or captain that or general this. It doesn't exist in the special operations or Special Forces community. And so I think from that standpoint, it's helped me as a civilian, leaving the military, having that exposure to that more collaborative leadership style, because I could see where a lot of people leave the military and think they can just walk into a new job, whether it's project management or something, and start telling people, hey, you need to do this, this, and this because I said so. Well, in the military, you're under contract. You're stuck. I signed my name. I'm going to be here for 3 years. But in a civilian company, if I'm responsible for like profits and loss and things like that and overhead, my talent, my employees could just go get another job somewhere else. And now I can't deliver the product because I'm a toxic leader. So it has to be a little bit more collaborative. And so those were some of the big takeaways from my time in Special Forces as it pertains to leadership is, the old adage, you have one mouth and two ears. Maybe you should be listening a little bit more to what the people are saying around you and not just pretend, but like actually active listening of really like, all right, this is good information. Like, how do we bring this to life? Because if they already have buy-in to their idea, it's easier to create momentum, right? It's easier to build excellence because you have their buy-in versus me trying top down, trying to like say, hey, we're going to do this and then convince people this is the right move. Maybe I have an idea and they have an idea and I find a way to, like the bus driver, steer everything in the right direction that we're trying to go to versus saying, being dogmatic and saying black or white, So I think some of those were one of the biggest leadership experiences that I had, was just more on a leadership philosophical level. versus an individual instance.
And why does this leadership collaboration style work in special forces, but not in the regular U.S. Army units?
Sure. Well, one, you're dealing with a much smaller group of individuals. So let's say all things equal, the training, the intelligence, the aptitude, experience, everything's equal, right? If you're the leader and you're trying to get input from, in my case, 27 people as a platoon leader or 11 people in Green Berets, it's much easier to absorb input, right? You're getting, everybody's looking at the same problem set from a unique perspective, but now I'm only getting 11 perspectives versus 27 perspectives. So right off the bat, it's easier to absorb information. Now you also but you are dealing with a higher intelligence, a more physically fit, a higher driven individual, somebody who's volunteered to be in the military, has volunteered to go to airborne school, volunteered to become a Green Beret, right? So you're dealing with people who absolutely want to be there. And you're on the very tippy point of the spear. So you're the most exposed, right? We're not like, Navy SEALs have more than, they have 18 plus people. Rangers are coming with a full platoon or a company of individuals. So the Green Berets operate in the small, as far as special operations, they operate in the smallest amount of teams. So you're very exposed to enemy forces. And so you really have to think, hey, do we want to go down there and just start shooting up the enemy? Or is there a more unique way we could solve this problem? Do we need to destroy the enemy, or can we disrupt them and frustrate them and take them off the battlefield that way, instead of going in there and overexposing ourselves and getting into a direct gunfight? So my personal philosophy on my team was, if we are getting into a gunfight, we've done something very wrong. Now, there are a lot of Green Beret teams out there that go out and they've looked for gunfights, or they've gotten into gunfights because the enemy also has a vote, and that's a very important thing. But the way our team operated is let's do things quietly, let's do things very surreptitiously, and see if we can surgically remove personnel from the battlefield versus just trying to be a more well-trained regular Army unit. So all things aren't equal, but if they were, it's working in a much smaller team. It is easier to get input and buy-in from a team versus a larger size unit.
And what it reminds me of in the civilian world, it's almost like startups, small companies driven by passionate individuals versus big companies in corporate America, where you have the structure and you have a lot of people. So I don't know how much you've been exposed to the startup culture, but do you think it's a fair analogy?
Absolutely. Because in a startup, you're wearing multiple hats, right? You might be, the CEO, but you're also the lead salesperson. You're also the guy who needs to take out the trash, right? So I think the thing from a startup perspective is everyone's a leader in a startup, because it's a small group, and it's all you can't look to one individual and be like, well, this is your startup. No. You're not getting into a startup if you already have buy-in to see success. Now, what does success look like? I don't know. It could be going to market, IPO, finding an investor, being bought out, selling, exiting the market. Startup has its different, strategic goal that it wants to get to, but everybody's got to be on board. And everybody's, but no successful startup is working a 9 to 5. You're all in. You're working 12, 18, 20-hour days, 7 days a week. Like, this is your baby. It's a passion. And Green Berets special operations as a whole is very similar to that. And that's what I saw. That's what drew me to it. Whereas the big Army is very slow, methodical, has policy. This is the right way to do something. Any deviation from that is obviously wrong, even though, it could be 99% in line, but hey, you're wearing your hat the wrong way. So obviously you're wrong. So it's more bureaucratic, right? Well, bureaucracies move extremely slow, months, years. You got to have all the papers and the signatures and the buy-in from so many different people. Whereas a startup, in a bureaucracy, a lot of people can say no to a project. And it's very hard to find the one person who can say yes. But in a startup, because everybody wants to be there, everybody wants to say yes. Let's move forward. Let's throw caution to the wind, and let's just be audacious. Let's take calculated risk, but risk nonetheless. And let's just move forward. Let's attack a problem. And we all hands on deck, because you can't leave it just to one person. Yeah. So you could be the accountant and the lead janitor, right? Because all those things can't be overlooked, or the ship starts to sink. So I think absolutely that collaborative environment, that passion, that all in, I think there's a lot of parallels between a small startup and then, a special operations team, a very much similar mindset.
And obviously, I know that you may not be able to share everything in your experience during your deployment. But if you can share just the idea of the missions that you were doing in the special forces and maybe some lessons from them that people can apply in their civilian lives.
Yeah, just one story just popped into my head, and I don't know where I'm going to go with this and how it's going to apply, but I'll try to extrapolate some lessons that I learned from it. So again, like my team, some teams have a lot of valor awards and because they acts of bravery. My team, starting with my team sergeant, who effectively is the COO, right? Wears many hats. So he has his job that he's been classically trained to do, and in this case, weapons, right? But he's been moving up in management, and now he's the COO effectively of the team. He also is really good at so many other things, right? And so he's wearing, like an entrepreneur, wearing all these other hats because we only have 12 guys total, right? So everybody's got to be. So maybe I'm the chief engineer, but I'm also really good at demolitions, but I'm also really good at acquisitions, accounting, and inventorying, things like that, right? My medics were really good at administrative. So everybody has a secondary and a tertiary job that they need to perform, like a startup. We have to be completely self-contained and self-reliant. So the core mission, one of the core missions of Green Berets is to partner with, in the terminology is foreign internal defense. So we're partnering with a force from that country and equipping them, training them, advising them on how to solve problems themselves. So in this case, I like to consider the Green Berets as the consultancy force for DoD. And so for the United States military, send out a small consultant team to go, what's the real problem? I know you say this is the problem, but let's peel back all the layers, find out what the real problem is. Where can we apply pressure and leverage to affect change? So that was our team's mindset. How do we do more with less? To include less gunfire. How can we, in a nuanced way, nudge the battlefield in a certain direction instead of putting ourselves out in harm's way unnecessarily, right? Again, you always have to take calculated risk, but if we're just going out one night to get into a fight, for what? Like, how is this tactical achievement affecting the strategy? And so we would be very calculated about who we went after. And we would spend months learning about this individual. What time do they wake up? What time do they go to sleep? Where do they go to sleep? Do they have a pattern? Do they sleep at this place every Wednesday night and this place on different night? And what's their pattern? Where do they like to go to eat? So you're building a pattern of life. You're really studying and you have to know yourself, but you also have to know your enemy and saying, when is the right time to grab this guy? And so that was my team's preferred method, was to capture. So you can't get any intelligence from somebody that you shoot, right? And that doesn't help win, right? It has a tactical success, but you can't tactically win your way to a strategic outcome, right? So we like to capture guys so we could talk to them and have intelligence to have, it's like capturing a drug dealer, right? You can remove drug dealers from the streets all the time, but if you're not getting up to the producer and the importer, right? So you're working your way up, and that's kind of what we like to do. And so we went to a guy's house, and it happened to be our very first capture mission. And so we had it all strategically planned. And so while we're walking there, we see these helicopters flying around with big, bright white searchlights, illuminating the ground below us. And we're talk to our guy from the Air Force, and we're like, hey man, are those our helicopters? Because what are they doing with big white lights? We're trying to work in the middle of the night. And he goes, no, I don't know who they are. I think they're supporting some other mission like 30 miles away, but they're like hanging out over here in what's called a racetrack, where they're just like in a holding pattern. Well, it just happened to be right over us. So anybody that's like looking for hey, where are the Americans? They're going to look right underneath the helicopters, but they didn't know we were going to be there, right? We're doing some secret stuff. So we're like, all right, so lesson one, the best laid plans, there's so many variables that you can't control, right? Whether that's in life or in business, you can only control what you control. And then you have to just be like, all right, how do we pivot from here? Or do we just continue moving forward with calculated risk? So the next thing we did is, hey, you know what? Why don't we just knock on the door? Instead of blowing up the door and doing some Hollywood stuff, right? Let's just knock on the door and maybe the guy answers. And so no joke, we just half-heartedly be like, yeah, right. Who would answer the door, right? But it's like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night with no electricity, no cell phone towers. Most people go to bed when the sun goes down. And at this time, it's like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. It was pitch black. So 10 o'clock at night, it's the middle of the night for them. And so we just knock on the door, and somebody had already climbed up on ladders and was like looking over night vision and say, hey, we see movement. And here comes an old guy walking to the front door, and he answers the door. He's like, yes, can I help you? And we're like, actually, as a matter of fact, you can. You could let us in. And if you got a bunch of guys with night vision goggles and rifles in your face, then usually you open the door. So we walked in very quietly, and we explained to him, hey, we're looking for so-and-so. Is he here? He's like, he is. Would you mind? We don't want to create a scene. We don't want to hurt anybody, but if you could just tell us where he is, we'll escort him. We're not going to do anything to him. We just like to talk to him. And he's like, yeah, he's over there. But hey, can you guys be careful? Like, everybody's sleeping in the same room. Like, there's little kids, like, please, if you have kids, you understand, please, nobody wants to hear a kid crying in the middle of the night. And we're like, a lot of guys on the team did have kids. So we're empathetic, right? We're not brutes. And so we walked into the room, shook him awake. We said, hey, you need to come with us. And I was the camera guy. So one of my extra things on the team was to take pictures. So I'm standing in this room that's like lightly illuminated, and I snapped a picture. And it wasn't until later that we were able to see, oh, there was a kid there and there was a kid there. Like, people just instinctively stepped around them, right? And not a kid woke up. And we grabbed the guy, and it ended up being his brother, right? There was a mistaken identity. And sometimes the names have cross over there, and there's a lot of parallel names. And so we brought him back with us. And when we questioned him, we realized it's not the right guy. It's his brother. So the next morning, we gave him some money, put him in a taxi, and we said, hey, you can go home. And we thought that was the end of the mission. We headed up to Kabul the next day to get some supplies. And while we were gone, his brother, the guy who we were actually trying to get, came to our camp to complain that we were rude. And some of our partners, our Afghans that we were partnered with, answered the door. And he's like, hey, I'd like to talk about what happened last night at my house. And they're like, man, get out of here. Like, nobody wants to talk to you. You're a joke. And we didn't find out until later. We're like, bro, that was the guy we actually needed to talk to, and you chased him away. So some of that stuff, you can't share some of these details, right, for operational security, because you have sometimes people playing both sides of the fence. But also what it highlights is what I was talking about before, is like shared vision, right? Because I was restricted on what I could tell our partner force, I couldn't have a complete buy-in from them on what the shared vision was, right? And so, the takeaway is leadership in one culture, can be constrained. It doesn't necessarily translate over. But again, that was one mission where, I learned a lot as far as culture and leadership, and then how, there's so many variables out there that you can plan for. And then things just fly in from out of there. And you're like, where did this helicopter come from? And so it's just to be agile, have versatility and adaptability with not just your leadership style, but also with the tactical elements on the ground. How do you pivot? And that creative, collaborative environment that I really enjoyed in the Green Berets is not something that I had found in the regular military to have that. And that's, and so I saw that. So that's an example in real life, that change.
Yeah, many thanks for sharing that story. Very, very engaging and interesting. So after you left the military, I know that you've been working on many things, but from your point of view, how did you transition, and what was that process for you, and how you applied all of those lessons to your civilian life?
Yeah. So I mentioned before, you need to know yourself and you need to know your enemy. And so I'd been in the military about 16 years, and I decided it was time for me to leave. I wanted to focus on having a family. I had a lot of guys around me that were married, had kids, wives having babies while they were gone, missing the birth of their child. And I spoke to my wife, and we decided that's not the marriage and the family that we wanted to have. So after 16 years in the military, I left to start a family. But I also recognized 16 years is almost like a life sentence, right? So if I commit a crime and I get a life sentence, it's 20 years. So I'm pretty close. So some of the consequences of that is being institutionalized. I had a uniform, like a prison uniform. I had a certain set of values. I had a certain vocabulary. My morals and my norms and my mores were all, in line with the institution that I grew up in, because I joined the Army when I was 17. And so now, half of my life has been spent in the military, and a good chunk of it in war or preparing for war. Now, all of a sudden, the next day I'm going to be like, I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm just me. I didn't know who me was. So I decided I'm going to get into defense consulting as a contractor. I moved my family to Dubai, and I was an advisor there for 5 years. I looked at that like a prisoner getting out and being like in a halfway house, like we're not going to completely release you out into the wild just yet. So I got a civilian job, but with military guys. So I was kind of like not in the military, but I was kind of still in. So I did that for 5 years, and then I moved back to the United States to raise my family. The transition has taken a long time, right? I think it's very hard for guys at that level or any level, whether you're a professional athlete, when you think you've spent your entire life to get to a certain point and you think you've culminated at age 33 or age whatever it is. Maybe it's the high school quarterback. He won state championship. And he thinks the rest of his life is worthless because that's the best I'm ever going to be. And that's a very sad state. And I was there as well. Like, I worked so hard to get here, and now you're telling me it's over. I was awesome yesterday, and today I'm a nobody. And so a lot of guys, military folks, go through basically an identity crisis or a midlife crisis, like whether you're 40, 45, or in my case, 33. It's basically a midlife crisis, which is just, who am I now? And so now I have to find myself. And so I started doing that and processing different things through art and through painting. And I took to it, and I could have ideas and just let my mind fade, and all the worries of the day just kind of disappear, and I could just turn off everything. I think a lot of guys can understand what I'm talking about, where they just want to turn their head off and just do nothing and think about nothing. It's one of my favorite hobbies, and art allows me to do that.
Well, before we finish, I want to let you share either an advice or some words, anything that you want with the listeners, something that we haven't had a chance to discuss yet.
Sure. This is something that I'm working with my kids on right now. So I have an 8 and a 13-year-old, and I don't think it's too early. I think it's a very age appropriate lesson for any age, whether it's an 8-year-old, a 13-year-old, or even me. I need to remind myself this sometimes, and I'm 46. Don't be afraid. You have so much to be afraid about, and all it will do is hold you back. Fear is just self-imposed chains. And again, I talked a lot about calculated risks. Bravery, courage is not the absence of fear, right? But the only people who move forward, and they're called brave, they're called courageous, is something in them pushes them past that point of fear. They're still moving, and there's still fear. There's very real threats. But if you allow that to freeze you and stop your momentum, then it's like we were talking about before with startups and large established companies. You're self-imposing bureaucracy on yourself. You have to be audacious in this life. There's a great quote, and I'm going to butcher it, by Ben Franklin, talking about basically people who are still very early on in their life, 25, and they already they have one foot in the grave already. They're 25, but they're going on 55. So they feel like they've culminated in their life, and they're just existing. They're not living with passion. They're not trying to accomplish anything. They're basically just, their Monday becomes their Friday, and they have no reason to live, and they're just going through the motions, and they're waiting to die, and they're young. You can do 20 years in the military, you could do 20 years at a company and retire, and then go back to school and start a whole nother 20-year career. This life is so long. Hopefully, we're blessed to experience it. So go experience everything. Don't let fear hold you back from anything.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your lessons, stories, advice. I resonate with that a lot personally. Yeah, many, many thanks for spending your time today, and good luck with what you do. And again, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.